Good afternoon. I'm David Darling. I'm Dean of the School of Engineering and Applied Science here at GW. And I'm very pleased to welcome you to our Student Research and Development Showcase this afternoon, and especially right now at 4 p.m. to our Engineering Innovation Panel discussion. And I want to extend a very special welcome to our panelists who are sitting over here and will be introduced shortly, and the moderator. I hope many of you arrived early enough to take a walk around and look at some of the work our students are doing. The posters will be on display till around 5:30, so if you haven't had a chance, we'll finish in here around 5 o'clock. Please circulate. In the moment, I'm going to turn the mic over to a panel organizer and moderator, Mr. Naeem Hussain, who will lead the discussion. The discussion is Creating Disruptive Interdisciplinary Innovation in Engineering. But first, I want to thank him, and really thank him very much, for assembling this amazing panel and organizing the discussion. Naeem is a member of the SEA's National Advisory Council, and this is the second year he volunteered to do this. And frequently, you know, people don't volunteer the second year. It was a huge amount of work, and I really am grateful to you. Naeem's bio and the bios of our panelists are in the program you've picked up. You can read through it. But Naeem will introduce himself and the panelists to you, so I'm not going to do that. So let me turn the podium over to you, Naeem, and you can get us started. So please join me in welcoming our moderator, Naeem Hussain.
Really nice, great. So, thank you, everyone, for first of all coming here on this afternoon. It was such a wonderful, atmosphere here today. It's the second year I'm actually participating as a moderator, but the third year that I've been here in the R&D showcase. So our panel discussion today is Creating Disruptive Interdisciplinary Innovation in Engineering. And the idea of actually coming up with this panel was very specific to this particular building, right? The whole idea of bringing different disciplines of engineering here today, here in this one area, and actually coming up with wonderful, fantastic ideas that hopefully will change the world in the future. So with that said, I'm going to introduce our panelists here. We have Ed Albrigo. Please come join us, the President and CEO of the Center of Innovative Technology in Virginia. We have Glenn Roberts, who is the Chief Engineer for the Center for Advanced Aviation System Development at the MITRE Corporation. And our very own NAC member, Gulu Gambhir, who is the Executive VP and the CTO at Leidos Corp. So thank you again. All of you, please come have a seat. So as we get started, I would like to kind of lay out how we're going to conduct this forum today. So we have about an hour to go through this panel discussion today, and we have some excellent panelists. We do want to leave some time for Q&A. So we're going to try our best for the last 10 to 15 minutes to open it up to the audience and take questions. We have divided the panel discussion into 3 distinct segments. Each of our panelists is going to come up and actually lead the conversation and do some opening remarks for a segment, set some baseline, and then we will get into a deeper dive conversation. Okay? So first up, I'm going to invite Ed to come on in and start the conversation on imagination, creativity, and innovation.
Great. Okay, that should be on now, right? Everybody here? Thanks, everyone. Thank you for coming, and thank you for the invitation, Naeem. So I'm opening it up around creativity, imagination, and innovation, because they're all tied very closely together. I see it every day in the work I do at the Center for Innovative Technology. We do a lot of investing, seed stage and early stage investing in companies. So I run into innovation, creativity, imagination every day on that part of it. So I wanted to start it off with, I love this quote from somebody that I admire greatly, the ability to think about how time isn't constant by sitting in a train. I couldn't even grasp that notion of how you even think about such things. And so I started off with imagination and creativity. I want to read a couple things, definitions that I find really intriguing and why these are so linked so closely. So So how do many people define imagination? It's that ability to create, there's that word, creativity, a concept that is not experienced by the senses. So it doesn't exist in the physical world. We have no grasp of it through any of our five senses. So imagination is that definition, creating that concept that doesn't exist. What's innovation? Well, I thought this was interesting when I saw this one definition of innovation and how it links. It's the process of introducing those new concepts into reality. So we have to take whatever we can think about and imagine, and innovation is very specific about bringing that into the physical world that we can experience on that. And it also goes further. It's the deliberate application of information, imagination, so we're linking back to imagination and creativity, and initiative to create a useful product or service. So for this one, it's very, as goes with my role, very geared towards bringing something physical that could be a product or a service that is of value to the world. How do we define value? Value can be defined a number of ways, but innovation is about something of value that has been created through our imagination on that part, which I think really goes well with this whole notion about imagination far more important than knowledge. Why is it important to us? And before I go on to this, when we think about innovation and the importance of it, I was just looking it up on LinkedIn. There's millions of users on LinkedIn. The word innovation is the second most used term that these millions of users use to describe themselves on LinkedIn. So clearly as a group, and certainly it's a biased group of people on LinkedIn, it's not just a random world population sample, but innovation is the second most used term that we use to describe ourselves on this incredible media. I didn't ask what the first one is. Probably somebody executive or something. We all want to be executives on LinkedIn on that part of it. But the other part, why it's really important to us, and I highlighted these words, we need new ways of thinking about the problems in front of us. And I think it ties very well to a quote Einstein also had. You can't solve problems using the same creative mentality that got you into the problems. So we have to innovate our way around it. And when we think about what we face, hunger, poverty, longer work, we need innovative solutions. And now from my role, I tend to focus on economic growth and economic development. That's why we're investing in companies to create it. So we really need innovation as a way to solve many of the challenges we have in front of us. We can't just apply the same thinking and ways we went about things before. When I take a look at it from what we need here in the United States, this is another aspect I did. I just Googled US economic growth innovation. And in 0.69 seconds, why it had to be 0.69 seconds, I'm not sure, there were 95,600,000 references on innovation and US economic growth. That's a stunning return. That's a lot of research on this. And you can see why if you look at where our economic growth is coming from. 23% from 48 to 2010, 44% out of that one area. Some people say, well, what happened in 05 to 10? Well, we had this incredible recession of which there was virtually no growth, so I can understand how a 5-year period leading up to it that was huge. But look what people are experiencing now. The belief is, a lot of economists, that over 50% of our growth in this country will have to come through innovation. That's a lot, right? That implies the work that you're all doing, what I saw up there, is going to be critical to even maintaining the type of economic environment we have in the United States. Over 50% of our growth has to come through innovation, if you look at it. So that gets to one real part which will lead into this section. Well, can creativity and imagination and innovation be taught? Can it be fostered? And I'm absolutely convinced it can. Again, I see it a lot in my work on there that it can be taught, it can be fostered, it can be groomed within individuals, within different groups, that it really can be done because I see it every day. I see it in the companies we fund. I see it in organizations like Leidos, wait till you see the type of stuff. If you haven't seen what his company has been doing, it's remarkable on the innovation pieces of it. So it certainly can. I think there's a really critical element, though, in doing this that will lead to this, along with trying to instill, inspire creativity and innovation. How do we really get people ready for risk? Because at the end of the day, innovation is about risk, and a lot of risk. You can fail. There's a risk of failure with your innovative idea. There's a risk of success, and along with that success comes extreme disruption. Let me give you an example. We see it every day, Uber. Uber's disrupting businesses all around the globe. So much so, you have governments trying to obstruct and put up obstacles for more proliferation of Uber in their business model. So success can bring the risk of disruption. It can bring financial risk. I see it with entrepreneurs every day, sinking everything they have into a really, and it actually is a really interesting innovation. There's no market presence for it, so they risk losing everything. Reputational risk. Large companies that don't innovate have the risk of just being drilled right out of the marketplace. On the other hand, if you do get a reputation taking that risk for innovation, you have to maintain it. The cycle, if you look at the history of Apple, up and down. If you watch the Jobs movie, right, up and down. Apple was innovative, it was no longer innovative. It is innovative, it's no longer innovative. And so that risk of once you're in there, and so a lot of when we think about it is how do you help people get comfortable with risk and taking that risk that allows them to be creative, to be innovative, to take some of these things into the market. So when I look at it, and when I look at everything you're all doing, that to me is one of the big things we have to look at. And along with that, and something that CIT does, who's there to fund this innovation, this risk-taking that tries to propel us to where we're going to need? So I just want to close it on that. Key aspects of it, we need innovation. It's linked highly to creativity and imagination. It also comes with risk and the necessity for funding. And I'd like to open up the conversation from that point. Thank you all very much.
Thanks, Ed. So Ed made a very interesting point, right, which is about, you said that, people can be taught to be creative. So let's kind of talk a little bit more. What are your thoughts, Gulu and Glenn, on the subject of enabling folks to actually learn how to be creative? What's that process look like?
Well, I was struck by what we saw upstairs and sort of the competitive aspect of having a competition like this. We were talking before about challenge problems. This is a big phenomenon now, putting out a challenge. We, at MITRE, we do that every year to identify new research topics. We reach out to the staff and have them put forward their best ideas through a challenge kind of a framework.
Right.
Yeah, we've also done some studies and talked to people here at GW and other places about can you teach employees for a large company, or in fact for any enterprise, to be more innovative? And overwhelmingly, we found the answer is yes. And there's some key skills that indeed can be taught, one of which is being empathetic with your customers. So the ability to really understand the challenges that your customers face allow you to have insight into a set of problems that presumably would bring value to them, and therefore, for a company, value to the business. Another simple concept is, typically as engineers, I see many engineers, we're dealt with the problem. Once we frame a single solution to that, we're ready to go. And I think the better engineers, the more innovative ones, can seek out and analyze a broad range of alternatives before choosing a single one. And so just that pause, that ability to think about problems a little bit more before deciding which one you want to implement, we found leads to more innovative solutions.
So an interesting thing that I was actually speaking to some of the participants today was, life after you get out of school. And, here we have this fantastic, environment where research is highly valued. And once you get out of school, you actually go to the corporations, and depending on which kind of corporation you land in, profits do matter. So would you like to give some insights into what that transformation might look like for students who come from this research sort of a background into the real world? And what should they be expecting? How should they be preparing for that journey?
Well, I look at it in a very different environment. So it's difficult for me to say from my past experience, because when I came out, you were looking at corporations like IBM, CSC, really big corporations that for the students coming out today, that's a very small set of companies these days. You're really looking at smaller, generally more innovative companies. I think what I see in to get ready for is that notion of identifying the risk tolerance of that organization. If you really want to be in a creative, innovative role, are you going somewhere that accepts failure at some rate in trying to uncover the new product, the new service that's out there? The beauty of it is there's so much information out there now about these corporations and their cultures. I think there's a great opportunity to say, does it really match with some values that I have? And the other part about it is getting used to. I have 2 children, the age of many of these students here coming out. At some point, the investors do want a return. Now, that return may come in a financial sense, it may come in a social sense, but there is something that must come out of that. And I think it's to prepare for that notion, I'm creating something, it has to be of value to others other than me to be successful.
I mean, for us, I think, exactly to your point on risk, the people that are most likely to take risk are the fresh thinkers that come right out of school. That's what kind of regenerates our thinking. Once you've been in a role for a while, in a company for a while, you can get set in your ways. And so we really like to shake up the thinking with some new blood.
That's what we value most from students, is that creativity, because you approach problems in a different way. For some of us that have been working in industry, maybe in the same domain for a long time, we tend to approach the problems the same way over and again.
Right.
And students bring a fresh perspective.
So I've had the opportunity to work in both the corporate sector in executive roles and then moved on to do my own consulting. And one of the things I always find very, very hard, even to this date, is you can put an idea forward, but you actually have to rally people around you to think and believe in your idea. So do you want to just shed some light on your thoughts and experiences on what people should be expecting as they go down this creativity path and how collaboration might break out?
I have a comment. So I think you can't, the passion has to come from within. We've tried starting research projects, by giving someone a task. Yeah. It doesn't work, right? That has to come from their heart. They have to come to you. Hey, I got this great idea. I saw this over there when I was at GW, and I want to bring that to MITRE. That's what the spark of innovation and the passion is really critical. And so we look for ways to generate that and to inspire it.
And I see along with that passion has to come a thick skin, because there's going to be a lot of resistance, especially if it's really innovative. And I'm sure most people have read that book here. It's a great one, The Innovator's Dilemma. If you're coming in through a corporation and they have one product that's really 35, 40% of the market, and you've come up with something that can totally destroy that revenue stream, that's really, really faces a lot of resistance in these companies. Certain companies accept it and they do self-destruct and recreate. A lot of them, you're probably going to have to be ready to take your passion, your idea, and find out who is willing to put up with that and move on.
I think related to that is the concept of perseverance, because that first idea you come up with may not be the best idea. In fact, almost always it's not the best idea. So as you refine that over time, you have an opportunity to really excel.
Right. So the process of engaging folks to get feedback is probably going to be a very important aspect of moving the ball forward, right? Let's talk a little bit about the innovation cycles that Ed, you brought up, which is, companies go through the cycle of, innovation, and then there's is this more about the leadership, or is it more about the people within the company as general trends based on what you see out there?
I think a lot of it is driven by the leadership, and not necessarily the leader, but the leadership set at the top, and the discussions and the willingness for risk-taking and exploration they're willing to do. And you can see it in cycles. A lot of it at the maturation of the company, they tend to get more conservative. They do tend to build a product line that has great market share, and they all want to huddle around it. And do you have a set of leaders at the top that are willing to keep challenging themselves in the status quo on that? I do see a difference. It's been interesting in the role I have. Leadership in companies that are private versus leadership in companies that are public. The quarterly reporting of public companies really, really can hold back that self-destructive tendency on that part of it. Then again, a lot of our pension funds and 401ks are invested in those companies, so there's an interesting dynamic on innovation versus renewal. and status quo.
So you want to add something to it?
I also think leadership is really important. It's the leadership in an enterprise that sets the tone, and in particular, the tolerance for failure. So we want to, within Leidos, really encourage a culture of collaboration and experimentation where people can create new ideas, try them, and if they fail, that's okay. We want to fail forward. We want to learn from the failure. In fact, we had a leadership summit 2 years ago, and as part of my portion of the summit, I had someone talk about something we had tried the year before, and it didn't work. And we spent a lot of money on it. But we learned something from that, and someone came to me afterwards and said, you know, a few years ago, we may not have talked about our failure in quite an open format, but I thought it was important that we do highlight what we've tried and what we've learned and move on and get better.
So then let's talk a little bit about the incremental innovation versus completely disruptive innovation, totally transformational ideas. And from your viewpoints, how is it different in the public versus the private sector?
Go ahead.
No, I'm just still thinking.
You have smaller companies that are going to be able to take an idea to market relatively quickly, and they might completely disrupt, like Uber, right?
Sometimes some small companies, some startups, they're moonshots. They create an idea, and either it's going to be a home run, or they're not going to be there 6 months from now.
That's right.
They got nothing to lose.
And so they
That's
have
right.
nothing to lose and everything to gain in a sense.
Yeah.
And so they go for those home runs. In a
Right.
bigger company, we take a portfolio approach generally. We have a couple bigger shots.
Yeah.
We usually don't bet the company. We have some bigger shots, but we have a lot of smaller shots.
Right.
And so innovation can be as much about those smaller ideas, a bunch of them really doing very well, as it is about one or two big home run shots.
Right. So, it was interesting in one of the innovation and entrepreneurship committees here at GW, we were talking about, how do students, what should smaller companies be looking for in students whom they're looking to hire? So the question here is larger corporations. When you're hiring, the next breed of talent here, what are you looking for in those students? What does the hiring process look like to actually garner the best of these candidates into your system? I know, Glenn, I was very honored and privileged that you gave me the tour of your facilities. 20 years back, I would have loved to come and work for you, right, in your lab. It was just fascinating. So, but what do you guys do in terms of outreach? How do you, and then what are you looking for in those students to draw them in?
Well, what we saw at MITRE was our aviation laboratory, which is an immersion environment. New people love to go in there because you essentially are in an air traffic control environment, and it inspires all kinds of new thinking. So by putting someone in kind of a realistic setting and talking to end users, we have former controllers and pilots in that environment. Essentially, we always tell all our innovators, know who the customer is, know who the end user is for your idea, and talk to them, right? So it's always important to know kind of where you're going with the idea and who should care about it. So we do that through a very immersive laboratory type environment. I think that's very engaging for kind of new hires. They really love that.
I've been in large and small, and I've seen it. One of the areas that I've looked for is what else are they doing in addition to their core area of study. So in several business units that I ran, it would be intriguing if you found the engineer who was also a proficient musician and probably played every week. Because I'll tell you, that is one of the things, that creative sense of something outside of their specific field of study that they're willing to dedicate time to. And it gets to what you were talking about. They bring a multidisciplinary view to what they're doing at work. Plus, if they're really good, I like going out and watching whatever bar they're in, watching them play the thing. But it really does, there's a difference in thinking than just an extreme focus on their technical discipline.
So with this, I would like to conclude this particular segment. I'm going to have Glenn actually do the next talk, which is going to be on consumer-driven innovation. But before we get into that, I do want to, on your behalf, have students actually reach out to you, hopefully after this session, to probably take a tour of the lab.
We'd be happy to do that.
Yeah. So with that said.
Okay, I think I'm going to stand over here real quick. So I want to show you some data. Engineers like data about R&D spending. This is a little bit old. I apologize. It's the most current I could find on short notice. But there is a lot of R&D money out there driving innovation. But what's happened is sort of a flip, right? So when I was the age of many of you in this room, R&D spending was driven by the Department of Defense and the space program. And even large labs like Bell Labs, where we invented Unix and transistors and things, the money flowed from DoD and the government, right? The government was driving that innovation, right? So what's happened now? It's the whole cycle has flipped, right? It's business that's driving R&D. And so the government is struggling, right? So this is a picture of Ash Carter. DoD is trying to tap into Silicon Valley, right? They've established a think tank out there that's getting off the ground. We'll see how that plays out. But again, there was a time not that long ago when the government was in charge. Now at MITRE, we work for the government. We run what's called federally funded R&D centers for the government. And so we're trying to help the government fulfill its mission. The other problem is the timing cycle that's happened. So this is a sort of a diffusion of innovation chart that what you can see here is how long various types of innovation and inventions have taken to take hold. And the main thing you see as you move from left to right over time is the slopes are increasing, right? So how old is your cell phone, right? If it's more than a year old, you're kind of obsolete, right? And yet, when I was growing up, things like color television were new things that were kind of, again, accelerating this curve. And then it's also, again, back to the obsolescence point, the life cycle of technology is decreasing and decreasing. So one of the hot topics, my part of MITRE works for the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, and they're really trying to deal with the growth of unmanned aircraft systems, drones, right? Everyone got one for Christmas, right? So the certification process for a new aircraft takes years, 6 years maybe, to certify a new airframe. The life cycle of a drone is 6 months. There'll be a new model out next Christmas, right? So there's this clash of cultures. But the government's role is, I call it, to ensure the good, right? We all know this triangle, right? You can have it fast, cheap, or good, pick two. The government's working the good, right? That's their job. Are the things fit to purpose? Are they efficient and durable and adaptable? All of the ilities, right? Expandability, upgradability. But most important, safe and secure. Certainly in my part of the government space, it's about the safety and security of aviation. When you get on an airplane, I hope all of you feel extremely safe. Man has never built a safer enterprise than modern aviation. There has not been a fatal accident in years. Think of the billions of passenger miles flown every year, and people don't die. And yet we lose 30,000 people a year on the roads, on the highways, and 100,000 or more in hospitals. So it's a phenomenally safe and secure system, and it got there through years and years of a very risk-averse culture. So now we have the clash of cultures, right? So you've got sort of this IT industry, iPhone, Apple, entrepreneurial Silicon Valley culture versus the world I come from of aviation. Let's contrast the two. So it's innovation-driven on the IT side versus safety. Revolutionary versus evolutionary. Speed to market versus proven technology. Entrepreneurial versus conservative, open versus proprietary. You got regulatory issues here in the IT industry. It's all open and unregulated. Risk is rewarded, risk is avoided, right? So if you're in the government, thinking about things like self-driving vehicles, cars on the road, right? What's the right balance? Should we just let everybody do anything they want? Should we let thousands of drones fly around in the city? They're going to crash into a plane and people will die. So these are not easy challenges to deal with. So I just wanted to, that was my little pitch on the podium here, to talk about this is really driving a whole, this sort of flip from the model we had 20 or 30 years ago, is really driving a whole new dynamic, certainly from my perspective and how the government deals with things. But I think there's probably other dimensions we can talk about as a panel here. So I think I will leave it with that, and we'll get on with your questions.
Please. So I'm going to pose the question back, right? Which is, so we have these, governments have been actually investing a lot in technologies which actually truly disrupt. And Ed, when you and I were having our conversation, you kind of talked about the whole idea of ARP and the Ethernet packet and how that got created. And was there any imagination to basically think at some point the world's going to be so connected? How did that evolution come about? You were kind of part of that that evolution.
Right. What he was talking about when early in my career, I worked in an organization. We were very early on internet protocols. What's this thing called TCP/IP? And was working with some of the early founders of the work that was going on, Dr. Vince Cerf and others. And nobody would have expected at that point the amount, the ubiquitousness of all of this interconnectivity and where it would go to. I remember having a discussion, what's this new thing somebody came up with and scanning a hyperlink? Why would people even care? And now what's not linked on that part of it? And there was no concept of where it could go, but there was an underlying belief that the dissemination of information, speeding it up would be better, not worse. Now you see a lot of countries going the opposite way. We think this is a really bad idea of how quickly information gets out and around. But the general premise at the time, this is going to be better. The rapid sharing of information will benefit many aspects, some commercial, some social. But that was one of the real things that drove a lot of that very early work in that area. But nobody would have expected this at this part. I certainly didn't conceive of some of the things you see today.
What struck me as I was preparing my talk was that the seeds of the destruction of that model were planted by the government themselves.
That's correct.
I think you could argue the internet and the microprocessor were really the drivers for the flipping of the curve. So we owe the existence of Unix and Linux and the internet and microprocessors to that sort of industrial defense complex that kind of got it all started.
Gulu, do you want to add something?
It is interesting to see over time, as that one graph showed, now these consumer electronics and the items that drive our world economy, such as upgrading your cell phone every 1 or 2 years, that wasn't envisioned, of course, when these technologies were created. And those consumer technologies and upgrade cycles are putting pressure on other systems and capabilities that we create in response to those. So you can imagine if you work in the intelligence business and your job is to collect signals of interest, and the signal types are changing and the devices are changing on a very rapid scale, you need to be able to respond at the scale and speed of the targets you're trying to take advantage of. And that's a challenge.
Right. Go back to my aviation model, I think iPads in the cockpit. Now, every pilot brings an iPad. That becomes their flight bag, right? But the FAA didn't make that happen. That happened bottoms up. It was a grassroots thing. And the FAA now has to figure out how to make sure that stays safe.
Right. So in our conversation, Glenn, you were talking a lot about how do you have a very diverse set of stakeholders, right? You have the government on one side, you have the pilot unions on the other. There's so much safety. We as passengers are all stakeholders, right? Can you tell us a little bit and give us some insights into what that process looks like when it comes to a company or an individual might have a great idea, right? What's the life of that idea and how does it actually come to market?
Right, certainly in the aviation arena, there's a lot of people that can say no, as you mentioned. It could be a union, it could be a manufacturer's not going to build something, it could be an airline doesn't want to buy something, and those are all independent business decisions. So when you're trying to change the system, introduce a new process, a new procedure, new technology, how do you change that sort of tough dynamic, right? It's almost as bad as Congress is nowadays. So the way we do it is we bring things alive in a laboratory setting. Bring people in, bring all these stakeholders in very early in the thought process. Walk them through it. Have the discussions, have the debate, but kind of bring things alive in a simulated setting before you go out and build or acquire or put procedures in place. And you hash it out kind of in the room to get that alignment.
So, Ed, you speak to a lot of entrepreneurs, and CIT actually makes a lot of investments, right, in new technologies in the state of Virginia. So, are you looking at new ideas from a certain lens, or your portfolio team looking at it from a certain lens when it comes to how does this particular idea or need actually meet what a stakeholder might want?
That's a great question, and we do come at it from, is there a problem this is actually solving? Or is there an opportunity that's out there? We have, it's called Mach 37, a cybersecurity accelerator, where the goal is you take very early companies, get them in, and help them develop out their product ideas, get them in front of various stakeholders, whether it's our investment team, another venture team, a corporation like MITRE that may want to incorporate their technology. But the idea is do a variety of stakeholders, it could be the investment management team, see a real opportunity or problem they're solving. So we use the term acceleration in two ways. Can we accelerate them to success or accelerate them to failure? In other words, this is going to go nowhere. Let's not spend a whole lot more time and resources or you yourself on it, or modify your idea. The current idea that you have may not take off, and we find that very valuable to do. So we look at, is this really going to solve something? What scares me, I'm new to the cybersecurity world and seeing that accelerator. Oh my God, the threats that are out there, it scares the heck out of me, so I'm willing to put a lot of money into those companies that are dealing with that. But it's really important aspect of it. Is there something they're solving?
I would agree. I think most innovations come from addressing a customer's pain point. And so the more insight you can get into those pain points, like when you travel, can you use a mobile app to check in or maybe track your bag to see, to get on the plane, is it with me on this journey? That was a customer pain point. And so at least some airlines have addressed that through a relatively simple innovation.
So I wonder what the role is of social media in all of this. I think in MITRE we use social media to kind of share problems and ideas and try and connect the two. I don't know if any of my panelists have any comments on that, but I think it's had some success. We, again, internally have competitions for new research ideas and try to connect problems to ideas.
Right. So, we have a lot of students here who, are working through their presentations today, and lots of great ideas. Any words of wisdom for them for taking some of those innovative ideas and what the next step could be, just at a high level? Like, what would be a good place for them to take this to? Is it more of an internal pitch, more from an engineering perspective? And I'm talking about, should they be looking to collaborate with others outside of their independent discipline to build the idea further? What should people do?
Well, I mean, I think one thing is perseverance. I think you will have to talk to a lot of people. Don't give up. I mean, I think the other message is probably learn how to communicate at different levels.
Yes.
Don't always tell your technical story. Tell sort of an executive story. Tell the business story. Tell the user problem story. What problem are you solving? And I think those are effective techniques to use.
So, Ed, Glenn, in our conversation, one of the things you did point out is this transition commitment level versus the technology readiness level.
Right.
Would you like to share some thoughts about that particular framework and how that might be something that students could be using?
Yeah, sure. So I think most people know about the term TRL, which is sort of the research readiness. It kind of came out of NASA and the DoD. But we have something we've been calling TCL, Transition Commitment Level, which is really a way we're trying to gauge, again, back to who's the customer, where's the problem coming from? And it's a way to try and measure engagement, right? So if I'm trying to solve a problem for you, Gulu, are you listening to me? Are you giving me funding? Are you responding to my ideas? Has there been a pilot activity launched? Have we, whether it's venture capital or in our case it would be sponsor funding. So we actually have tried to, I can provide the information to people later if they want to see it, kind of gauge that. So it's not just about is the research ready, but is there someone ready to accept it? And of course, if you get too far in one corner, your research is all done, but nobody cares, right? Or if you're here, you've built up the hype, and everybody wants it, but you're only on a TRL1, you really haven't done the research yet. So it's a way that we try to kind of make sure that you're both doing the research and engaging with the end user.
You want to add something to it, Ed or Gulu? No. Right, so let's move on to the next topic, which Gulu, you're going to be doing. And this is on innovation in large enterprises.
We touched briefly on this idea of how to use social collaboration. That's an important one, so I want to touch base on that. So as we think about it in the context of a publicly traded large company, 18,000 employees, how do we get innovation at scale in a large company? And so we started with a simple definition. What is innovation? So for us, innovation is the implementation of new ideas with business impact. So that doesn't mean it's necessarily a research and development or technology innovation. It could be a business innovation, a process innovation, how we sell to a customer, how we understand customer requirements. And so we built this framework, this model. And so it starts off with the culture that we want to create. We're a company with a 46-year heritage. And so building on that culture being defined as what we do habitually every day without thinking. It's just how we come to work and we do this. And in general, when we think about affecting change in any kind of enterprise, it comes down to people, processes, and tools. On the people side, I mentioned before that we think there are some innovative skills that can be taught to employees, like customer empathy, like considering a wide range of solutions. On process, we have some processes on how an employee can take an idea, and I'll give you an example of how an employee can take an idea and share that with the enterprise. Of course, we enable our employees with tools. We think another really important element of this, particularly at scale with an 18,000 person enterprise, is collaboration. So if we have an employee in one part of the company that's solving a customer problem, we have an employee in another part of the company with a similar customer problem. If we share that idea, the fact that it's already been done one time doesn't make it any less innovative for that customer that's seeking a solution. So we think that connective tissue, that collaboration, is really a key part of innovation. And then lastly, our customers. So customers you could view as either on top of the model or on the bottom. But the idea is we're trying to solve our customers' problems. That's how we've been successful as a business. The most critical element on this framework. The model itself that I'm showing is less important than our commitment and our follow-through on the processes, the corporate commitment from the top down to actually focus on innovation. So let me give you a couple examples of, I think, how this has evolved over time. So I want to start off very briefly with how communications have evolved over the years. So early on, of course, communications were verbal. At some point, we discovered the ideas in large enterprises that we write memoranda. And some of you have been around long enough where you get a hard copy memo. And memos were used historically in large companies to kind of communicate official direction and action. But there are a few problems. One is they took a long time, they were very formalized, and also they were one way. And so that wasn't an ideal channel for communications. Suddenly email came around. And now when we look at our filled email boxes, we wouldn't necessarily view that as an innovation. But in fact, relative to the world of written memos, it was in fact an innovation. And so this democratized the ability to share ideas in a large enterprise. And so now we move into the 21st century into a social world, into a social environment. The idea of working out loud, where you share your ideas while they're in process. You share your ideas where you're looking for help from your colleagues, whether it's inside the company or outside the company. So we've done some crowdsourcing internally. On the left-hand side of this graph, when you think about, again, a big enterprise, 18,000 people spread over a couple hundred locations in multiple countries, multiple time zones, multiple organizational stovepipes, how do we get them to work together? So we have one area on our internal crowdsourcing platform, our social intranet, called Ask Your Colleagues. And some of you know what Metcalfe's law is. Metcalfe's law tells us that the power of a network is proportional to the number of users or nodes in the network. And so we introduced this concept, Ask Your Colleagues, in 2014. And at that time, it took us 3 weeks from the time an employee would pose a question, whether it was a technical question or some other type of question, to get a response. But over time, within the next year, as we engage more employees in this platform, we now have 4,000 participants. We're getting 95% of questions with a helpful response within a span of 2 days. Again, just based on the number of people, we have a 4x increase from 1,000 to 4,000 in the crowd size, and now a 10x improvement in the average answer time. Another process innovation, I use as CTO, I manage our research and development budget as a portfolio. So a few larger bets, some with longer-term payoff horizons, some with shorter-term payoff horizons spread across the markets and the customers we support. But I also try to allocate about 10% of our portfolio to emerging problems or really new ideas that employees have that are not tied to businesses that we're in today. And this allows us to create the seeds of innovation for what we hope will be a larger part of our business in the future. So twice a year, we have formal competitions where employees can submit 2-page proposals. And with that 2 pages, they can win $50,000 of internal funds to do a research and development project. So we've gotten, in the past 3 rounds, 225 proposals. I've awarded 35 projects. And I kind of would expect about 20% of those to carry on to the next level. And again, I provide some corporate matching funds in addition to some funds within our business organizations for those follow-ons. So I'm happy to say about a third of those, 13 of the first 35, have actually gone to a follow-on phase. Lastly, I want to move to the topic specifically of multidisciplinary innovation. So one of the challenges that a customer faced of ours is, as you can imagine, in these wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, the United States and our allies were fighting overseas. And pretty quickly in both campaigns, we established air superiority. And that means we could fly relatively vanilla commercial aircraft in a hostile area. with some impunity. And so as a company, something that our customers needed was the ability to integrate intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, or ISR sensors, on commercial aircraft to take advantage of multi-intelligence collection and processing, and then real-time alert troops on the ground, or U.S. troops and allied troops on the ground, about potential hostile threats. So we've integrated these sensors onto over 30 aircraft. We've flown over 150,000 safe flight hours. We've saved the lives of many allied troops, U.S. troops, and even civilians on the ground. And the way we did this in some cases was we went from a kind of a blank commercial airframe to operations overseas within less than a year, in some cases 8 months. Truly revolutionary capability, bringing real innovation to our warfighters. And the way we did this was through multidisciplinary innovation. So if you think about what it takes to do something with an aircraft, and many of you students here in all these different disciplines, aeronautical engineering, mechanical engineering, structures, material science, control systems, operations, systems engineering, configuration management, safety and quality assurance, that's just for the aircraft. So if we're going to modify the aircraft, or we're going to put a bump out on top for a satellite dish, if we're going to put sidecars on the side, get new airworthiness certificates, all those require aircraft expertise. Then, of course, all the payloads, electrical engineering, chemical engineering. We've done some pretty exotic payloads, material science, physics, optics, communications, cybersecurity. Again, multiple disparate technical domains coming together. And to make this all work, of course, you need a very effective ground segment. How to process all this data in near real time in a meaningful way. In some cases, we've done this across multiple classification levels. Some of you in the business, we use the term PL5, Protection Level 5. Really state-of-the-art system that we're really proud of in terms of the influence that it had on these operations overseas. And of support and management. So if you look together at all these disciplines, I think that's one of the great differences between what you see in a university setting and what you see in an industrial or government setting. Is to work on a large program like this typically requires 100 or 200 or more people and subcontractors and teammates coming together across multiple technical disciplines to really create a system that makes a difference. And so in the end, I think it's the true teamwork, the true multidisciplinary collaboration that allows us or any enterprise really to solve customer problems in a meaningful fashion.
Thanks, Gulu. So, some thoughts from you, Glenn?
Well, you know, I meant to say something on multidisciplinary before. Just an example we had, because you never know when you're going to see some bit of inspiration that comes out of this. We had an engineer who was kind of a budding artist on the side and was familiar with trompe-l'oeil, which is a technique for painting 3D pictures that look very realistic. And he was able to apply that to an ability to make markings on an airport surface that would jump out at the... Now, that's not something that you could have planned or thought of. It's just how, when you have this sort of diverse set of thinking in a room, kind of new things come about. That's the kind of thing I think you're looking at.
Interesting. So, you briefly talked about the notion of management and leadership, and how they play a very important role in large organizations and setting up, for collaboration. What is the kind of timeline and horizon that it took for Leidos to kind of get through this curve to actually bring to bear these collaboration platforms?
That's a good question. Our platform started off small at a pilot level. We tried it in one part of the organization. It looked like it had some value. So from that, we scaled it up to the enterprise. And even at that point, we began extracting some business value. But over time, we continuously improve it. And now I think we're getting even more business value out of it.
And we were talking about some of the work you did with Fannie Mae, and you actually managed a lot of the portfolio for them, if I remember correctly. So, and one of the conversations we had was around planned innovation versus organically just let it happen on its own. So, do you want to give some perspectives on planned versus unplanned and how that worked out for you guys?
Sure. I was in a corporate development group, and it was actually Freddie Mac, so I got Freddie Mac. The small one. Yeah, all the time. Get them confused. And what the role there was, could we identify business process, technology, financing strategies that would be disruptive to the way the market was evolving, but still maintain a high level of liquidity for homeowners? And it represents a really big challenge. A lot of the work that we did involve multidisciplinary. It wasn't just about bringing in the finance team and seeing what they could do. It involved a lot of technology on it. We looked at a lot of small companies and went down the path of, do we buy, do we acquire, do we just invest, do we license on those platforms? And some of the challenges that are faced with this, and maybe your organization finds it, innovators will move a lot faster than the organization was ready to adapt to them. Like, they're ready to go in 6 months, and we'd want a pilot for 6 months. Then we'd want an early launch for another 6 months or a year after that. And by that time, 18 months, they probably moved on to a completely different company at that point, because their cycle of innovation and thought process was way beyond ours. On the other hand, those that were successful really did bring in a different way of thinking. And it was much like what Gulu was talking. It didn't transform it overnight, but the seed was planted, and 2 years later, you were doing something very different than what you had envisioned when you first got involved in that part of the project. So that could be rewarding. It was, how could you keep an innovative team on the ground for 2 years while they work through the corporate management processes?
And also the regulations portion of that, right? Because some of these industries are highly regulated.
Financial services is highly regulated, and you tend not to see much innovation in highly regulated industries. It gets back to that safe part.
Aviation is the same way.
And with the thing, with the overriding one, do no harm, some of these things that can be highly disruptive, you don't know. Now, you measure harm differently, but it's very difficult to get beyond that do no harm barrier on a lot of innovations.
So my last question to the panel before we turn it on to the Q&A session for the audience is, what's the role of academic institutions in this journey for for innovation and actually helping students to get to that creativity and imagination and embedding that within these folks? And what can schools specifically do, in your opinion, from an industry perspective, for the interdisciplinary activities?
Multidisciplinary education, to me, if I were to. How do you weave in different disciplines into that part of it?
Yeah, to me, it's about innovation and really the fresh ideas. I think people come to MITRE because we've got access to the government. We understand the problems. We have data. We have models and labs. But quite often what the university crowd brings is really new, innovative ideas that we wouldn't have thought of that come out of a diverse culture.
Mm-hmm.
I think the 21st century universities really playing a huge role in innovation, between innovation and entrepreneurship. The number of companies that are founded by recent college graduates at the undergraduate and graduate level, it's really quite extraordinary. And now, the universities are making efforts to teach these innovation and entrepreneurial skills to students, and the students are generally hungry for these skills.
Yeah, good point.
Okay, with that, thank you very much again.
Sure.
And I'm going to turn this over to for Q&A. So it's an open forum. Please, you can raise your hand. Yes.
So I'm going to pick up on Gulu's last statement. It's something you mentioned earlier around the porpoising of innovation over time. Apple's innovative. It's not innovative. It's innovative. SEAS does a good thing by combining a focus on technology and innovation and giving the students exposure to the business school. Mixing teams with business students and giving them a perspective around entrepreneurship and what it takes to develop a new product, a new business around the product. We saw a lot of that upstairs. That's all a good thing. I have my own opinions as to why that porpoising occurs, but I'm more interested in yours. You mentioned leadership and that being a key factor in that. What would you describe as the other antigens that cause innovation to ebb and flow over time?
Well, I mean, one obvious one is the economic cycles. I think when venture capital is out there, it kind of feeds a whole chain of innovation, and kind of when we have recessions, a lot of that dries up. We saw that in the late 90s, of course, but then there was the dot-com bubble.
I think what I see in both the small startup world as well as the corporate world, in our R&D, for example, it's the success of the few that justifies the program as a whole. And so if you're a venture company and you fund 20 companies, typically only 2 or 3 are really going to succeed, and maybe 1 out of 100 really hits it really big. But the rest of them, you don't hear about them because they're not around anymore. And so, we see the same thing in our R&D. And so that use of the portfolio approach, I think, helps allow us to cultivate the seedlings into larger efforts typically. So we have some home runs, but we have some singles and doubles and triples. They're all good.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
So I had a question generally about governmental policy, one of the topics that you guys were sort of touching on.
I'm not sure your mic is on. She's waving at you there.
It is now.
There you go.
I wanted to ask you guys about governmental policy. A couple of you touched on it while you were speaking. One of my observations is that generally by the time the government has developed a policy and actually enacted it, where it's actually gotten out into the world, that the rest of the world now, because of the curves that you were talking about, has moved on so far that the policy might as well be completely useless. Can you talk a little about how the government comes about being more innovative about making sure that it can test and get those policies out there faster so that they can turn them around and make changes to them at a speed with which the rest of the organization of the United States is operating at this point?
So one technique that's gotten a lot of attention, I don't know that we can point to success yet, is really learning from the notion of agile software development, and there's a whole kind of art that's been developed around building software incrementally in a team fashion. And so we do have folks looking at, gee, could we build government systems that way? And instead of trying to figure this whole thing out, answer all the questions, and have a 7-year development cycle, can you develop capabilities, policy, new abilities in a more incremental and agile way? Because you saw my curve, with the time frames shrinking, we have to change our processes. We can't stick with the old ones that take years to get solutions.
There's also lots of contests and other things that the government is doing for turning even the procurement cycles into what they're terming as agile procurement cycles, right? So
Right.
that's also happening.
I think on the law side, I mean, right now what's in the news, of course, you're probably all hearing about is that Apple encryption
Yes.
issue, right? And so until there's a consensus in order to change the law, that process takes time. So I don't see it catching up anytime soon. And we talked about drones, what the FAA's been doing with drones. The Internet of Things is coming. It's going to come on really big, I think, in the next few years. Driverless cars, autonomous vehicles. There are a lot of these technology push issues in society today, and it will take a while for the laws and regulations to catch up with them.
I think one of the things, and I don't have a good solution for it, I actually see a lot of policy being done rather quickly and put in place. The issue is, if it's got some severe unintended consequences, it's very difficult and slow to go back and unwind some of it. Again, I have no solution for how you do that, because it does take a lot of consensus building to work its way through. And at the federal level, it's much harder to do that than at the state or the local level. But that is one of the things I do see actually policy coming out. It's intended to do something properly, and then there's an unintended consequence nobody ever thought of, and it's very difficult to unwind at that point.
Take the next question. Anyone's got one?
You know, I did have one observation. Is when you asked that one, what could students do that might get them in this cycle? And when I think about it, and I think about all the companies we interview, we look at about 500 companies a year to invest in about 30 of them. One of the things I look for, can they tell me what the value is of what their outcome is in about 2 minutes?
Right.
If they can do that, they've thought about it, and they probably work there. I'm far less concerned about the educational background at that point or who may have invested in them, but in 2 minutes, can they tell me what the value is of what they're trying to create? And the good and the bad news is in 2 minutes, they say, oh, that's really good, or oh, that's really bad, I don't want anything to do with it. On the other hand, it's to that failure part, and probably something both your organizations have. If you have somebody able to do that, I'm willing to listen to their second idea that might be better, and their third idea, and their fourth idea. So I would say get really good at honing the value of what you're working on and explain it in 2 minutes.
Yeah, the term of art is elevator speech. You're stuck on the elevator with the CEO. You got 2 minutes to convince him, come on to my office, I want to talk to you some more.
Yes, yes.
Very good advice.
Or our venture capitalist.
Yeah.
I think one thing students could do is, if you have an idea for a business, spend some time with the potential customers or buyers
Absolutely.
of that product or service you're going to offer and test it. and not just one, with a dozen, 2 dozen, 3 dozen, and see if you really have something. You may have an understanding of their value and that proposition to them that's very different than, in fact, what it really is. But you won't know that until you talk to a bunch of people.
And it doesn't cost much except your time and the time of the people who are going to give it to your cause.
And I'll give you an example of one we saw. I can't give all the details of it. These young people came up with this really interesting device that was going to, it's actually, I can't wait to see it. I think it will get to market someday. But they brought it in, and they didn't have a design person with them on the team. And we had talked about that because this beautiful little device that's going to really do a lot of wonderful things. We all looked at it and said, and the design person, there's no blinky lights on it. And they all stopped. But it does this and this, yeah, but nobody will know if it's working. Put blinky lights on it so they could see it. It was incredible what that did to their second and third round of investment, that they had blinky lights on this thing that people go, oh, look, it works. That part of it.
It's awesome. Other questions from the audience?
All set.
Dean's prerogative.
It's great to, excuse me, end on a note of humor. Maybe we should flash the lights up and down here. But I want to thank you, Naeem, and Glenn, Gulu, and Ed for that great discussion.
Thank you.
We covered a lot of ground. I think there's a lot of things for us to think about here. And so thanks for sharing your background, expertise, experience with us.